Afternoon from Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump has dismissed demonstrators as professional protesters, accusing the media of encouraging people to take to the streets. This followed a second night of protests in cities across the U.S. The political fallout has also intensified, with the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson urging European leaders to stop whinging. That represents a significant change of tune after he previously said Donald Trump was out of his mind.
You know, I think it's time that we were overwhelmingly positive about the possibilities here, and I may respectfully say to some of my beloved European friends and colleagues that I think it's time we snapped out of the general doom and gloom about the result of this election and the collective whinge-o-rama that seems to be going on in some places. And I think in our country, I think we should recognise that this is an opportunity. I think we should take what the President-elect has had to say about his feelings for our country at face value. He's had a very, very good conversation with our Prime Minister, Theresa May, earlier on today. He spoke of a spectacular relationship with the UK. He is, after all, a deal maker. He wants to do a free trade deal, and I believe this is a great opportunity for us in the UK to build on that relationship with America that is of fundamental economic importance to us, but also of great importance for the stability and prosperity of the world.
Well, we're hearing that Boris Johnson will be speaking live on Sky News within the hour. He's on his way to Prague at the moment. Following the story from the Foreign Office is our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey, who joins me now. Darren, it is noticeable, isn't it, that the British government seems to be taking a very different tone to President-elect Trump to, for example, Germany.
Indeed, and Boris Johnson is typifying that today, isn't he, in many ways, Adam, suggesting that this is potentially an opportunity for Britain. I think the hope here at the Foreign Office, and certainly in Whitehall, is that the Trump administration may be more open, more welcoming to Britain than President Obama's administration was, and that is why they view this as potentially an opportunity, given the fact that we also have Brexit Britain. But it is a very different tone, as you were saying, from the words that Boris Johnson was using only a matter of months ago, describing Donald Trump as out of his mind, and saying that the only reason he wouldn't go to some parts of New York was the real risk of meeting Donald Trump, after he suggested there were no-go areas in the UK. So, in a sense, yes, the government are having to deal with the reality of the situation that it is Donald Trump who is president-elect, but Boris Johnson trying to spin this, Adam, in many ways, as an opportunity as well for the UK.
Now, the White House or the Trump administration team invited Theresa May to come to a meeting with Donald Trump as soon as possible, but it actually looks she might be beaten to that handshake by one Nigel Farage.
Indeed, almost certainly, Adam. Nigel Farage, the UKIP leader, is in the United States as we speak. We believe he's heading to New York later on today, potentially to meet Donald Trump this weekend. Now, you know, unlike most UK politicians, it was Nigel Farage who championed Donald Trump, who campaigned for him in the United States, who thought he would actually win, unlike the Foreign Office here in London, who were working the assumption that Hillary Clinton would win. And there are suggestions, unsurprisingly, some would say, that actually the UK should take advantage of the fact that we've got a significant in with the Trump administration in Nigel Farage, that we should utilise him to try and strike a good deal for Britain. Well, I can tell you, Downing Street are suggesting that that is not going to happen at all, Adam. They have completely poo-pooed this idea that somehow Nigel Farage could act as an intermediary. They're suggesting that it will be Theresa May and the government who will be dealing with the Trump administration, and not the UKIP leader.
And of course, Kim Darroch, the British ambassador here in Washington. Darren, thank you very much indeed. Well, Donald Trump may have won the presidency, but he certainly hasn't won over everyone here. During a second night of protests, police in Portland, Oregon declared a riot after a peaceful process descended into violence. One local journalist described the city as a war zone as the police used pepper spray and rubber baton rounds to disperse crowds. A warning: this report from Sky's Ian Woods contains flash photography.
The election is over, but for some, the campaign against Donald Trump goes on.
Donald Trump has got to go!
Protests against the president-elect continued, fueled by his policies and rhetoric over the past year.
Not my president!
And maybe also because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But the only result that counts, the Electoral College sent Mr. Trump to the White House and a first meeting with the current president. And while they began the difficult process of bridging the chasm between them for the good of the country, their wives discussed the role of First Lady. The White House would only release a photograph of Melania Trump's meeting with Michelle Obama.
So this is the amphitheater.
Later, Mr. Trump took in the view from Capitol Hill and met Republican leaders who'd held him at arm's length for months. But they, too, are now singing from the same hymn sheet.
Donald Trump had one of the most impressive victories we've ever seen, and we're going to turn that victory into progress for the American people, and we are now talking about how we're going to hit the ground running to make sure that we can get this country turned around and make America great again.
I think we're going to do some absolutely spectacular things for the American people. We look forward to starting. In fact, truthfully, we can't get started fast enough. And whether it's health care or immigration, so many different things.
But some questions remain unanswered. American Muslim leaders still blame Mr. Trump for inciting hatred.
He's created an environment of fear and hate, and what's most dangerous is he's normalized that level of just dangerous rhetoric that ultimately has led to an increase in hate crime.
Mr. Trump returned to New York, where his residence now has extra police protection. It'll be 10 weeks before he becomes president and exchanges Trump Tower for the White House. Ian Woods, Sky News.
Well, most of America's newspapers this morning concentrating on that historic meeting between Donald Trump and Barack Obama, the first time the two men had actually spoken directly to each other ever, and also the first time Donald Trump had been to the West Wing. That is the Washington Post. Trump-Obama meet at the White House. This is the Wall Street Journal. Presidential handover begins, concentrating on the handshake there. Here we have the New York Times. Trump and Obama meet to break the ice, is how they put it. And there a lot of talk about changes in policy, including on climate change, which Donald Trump has said he doesn't believe in. Then we've got the New York Daily News open house. Donald Trump looking at his new digs. Mrs. Trump also went and met Michelle Obama. But one of the things that was interesting about the meeting yesterday is, by American standards, there was very little media coverage, just a photograph of the two First Ladies meeting. Incidentally, Melania Trump has already changed her Facebook identity to First Lady. This is the New York Post coming to grips. But the USA Today taking a rather different line, actually talking about a rise in racist acts following the election. Well, joining me now is the former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, Republican strategist Ron Christie. Welcome to you. Let's talk about the work of becoming president. He's got until January the 20th. What has Donald Trump and his team got to do in the meantime?
They have a lot of work to do. First of all, the incoming president-elect needs to select the White House Chief of Staff, the person who will run the White House on a day-to-day basis. And then next, they have 4,000 political appointments all across the federal government that they have to fill. But in the interim, the president-elect has to select his cabinet. Who's going to be the next Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the key positions that will give assurance not only to Americans, but people around the world that an incoming Trump administration is serious, that they've been thoughtful, and that they understand how to govern.
And there he's got to strike a balance between payback to the people who've been loyal to him and, as you say, sending out a message that this really is going to be a credible and competent administration. You got any names in mind?
I do. There's a strong talk that Reince Priebus, the current chairman of the Republican National Committee, is going to be the next White House Chief of Staff. There's also word that Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, is well positioned to become the next Attorney General of the United States. Beyond that, it's a bit speculative. Ben Carson, who also ran, the famous neurosurgeon, is widely talked about as either being the Health and Human Services Secretary or the Department of Education. So there's some real top-line names, but the real question becomes, who will become the next Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State? And at this point, we don't really have very many famous names that are out there in the running.
Do you have any names at all?
I think former Lieutenant General Michael Flynn would be a good spot, either for the National Security Advisor or to be the Secretary of Defense, but still nothing yet from the transition office of President-elect Trump.
And there is a problem, or potential problem, isn't there, that some of these appointments, most of the main appointments, are subject to congressional approval. And, for example, someone like Governor Chris Christie, who has this big cloud hanging over him because of what went on in New Jersey over blocking traffic in an act of political revenge, might not get through confirmation.
That's right. What's called infamously here Bridgegate. In the United States Senate, you need 60 votes out of 100 to confirm someone to get through the United States Senate to take the job. The Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, has indicated he might undertake what would be called the nuclear option, which would change the rules of the Senate that would allow a 50-vote majority rather than 60. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot to be said, but I think your analysis is right. Someone with Christie's background and a little bit of the controversy that follows him might not make it through the Senate.
Now, as Donald Trump would say, a spectacular set of suggestions for future policy under Trump administration. Which ones of those do you think he won't be able to deliver on? I mean, a wall with Mexico, for example?
I think that's going to be more difficult than he imagines. And when you're campaigning on the trail, you'd think there are all these things, if I'm elected president, here's what I'm going to do. But A, he'd need to get a statute through Congress, a law passed by the Congress that he'd sign into law. Do you have enough Democrats and moderate Republicans in the Senate that would pass such a law? I don't know that they would. Similarly, he wants to dismantle Obamacare, the President Obama's signature health care initiative. I don't believe that there's enough sentiment in the Senate and in the House of dismantling it in its entirety. I think that you would have a bill that would have pre-existing conditions for those people who are already ill, allowing people to stay on their parents' insurance until they were 26. So I think the bedrock foundation of Obamacare will remain. And President-elect Trump is going to find that dismantling Obamacare is going to be a lot harder than he thinks.
And what about tearing up some of those international treaties that deal with Iran, the Paris Accords on global warming, and, of course, trade treaties?
I think the Paris Accords relating to global warming, I think that's in serious jeopardy. Similarly, I think the Iran deal is in jeopardy. This wasn't a treaty. This was not an executive order. I think with the stroke of a pen, President-elect Trump could say, we're going to renegotiate with the Iranians. You've seen in the last couple of days, the Iranians have said, don't scrap the deal. We want to keep this in place. So it'll be interesting to see, and that's why it's so critical that he gets his incoming Secretary of State and his national security team in place to think about these very serious matters of what he will do on January 20th when he takes power.
Mr. Christie, thank you very much indeed
Thank you
for joining us. Back to you, sir.